Welcome to It's the Economy. Contrary to fears, President Trump did not announce tariffs on day one of his presidency, which pushed the dollar index at 1 point below 108. But it came up because he did threaten tariffs on Mexico, in Canada, and even Europe. Also threatened a possible universal tariff. What does all this mean for the dollar, for inflation, Fed rate action, and how will all this impact Asia and India? I have with me Chetan Ahya, Morgan Stanley's chief Asia economist. Chetan, thank you very much for spending time for us on what is definitely a busy morning for you. Well, first up, from the lack of any concrete announcements on day one, should we assume it will be a slow grind up in terms of tariffs? Nothing big and immediate.
Yeah, Latha, so that before the inauguration speech, this is the message we had, and essentially this is coming from our head of U.S. public policy, Michael Zezas, who basically said that, you will hear the announcements fast, but the implementation of tariffs will be slow. And I think what we heard from the president seemed pretty much similar to that expectation that our team had.
Okay. So if it is a slow phased manner, how would you look at, Asia getting impacted in 2025, including India?
So right now, what we have assumed is that tariffs will be largely focused on China within the region. And for China, we are assuming that the weighted average tariff will go from current 10.5% to 25.5% by end of 25. And this will begin to go up from second quarter of 2025. And we'll see another 10% weighted average increase in 2026 to eventually take the number to 35 or 36% by end of 2026. So that's sort of path we are looking at.
Okay.
And with this, we think that the impact will be much more muted compared to what you saw in 2018-19. Now, mind you, the critical assumption that we are making is that there will not be universal tariffs. And there will not be tariffs on all the countries in the region, because if that happens, then the corporate confidence impact will be much more than what we are assuming in our base case. So I think that's sort of the broad summary.
Okay.
In terms of the growth implications, currently we have regions growth going down from 4.5% to 4.1% in 2025. In large part, this is because of tariff and the negative impact on the region because of the trade tensions.
Okay, but this doesn't take into impact possibility of universal tariffs and a steep fall in business confidence.
Yeah, so that's the risk scenario. So we are saying two risk scenarios effectively. One, where there is a universal tariff. The other scenario would be that it's not universal tariff, but the bilateral disputes are so many that they kind of effectively bring the same effect on corporate confidence as a universal tariff would do.
Fair enough. Before I come to India, a bit more about the global macro. The fear is that higher tariffed goods imports into the US will mean higher inflation and therefore possibly no cuts from the Fed. Your thoughts on Fed and on inflation in the US?
So right now, we are expecting in our base case inflation to head a bit lower, and therefore we are expecting the Fed to cut rates twice in 2025. But at the same time, the US team has been highlighting that, look, if the tariff and immigration policies do impose upside risk to the US inflation, then the Fed will accordingly have to alter its path. But just on the tariff impact on inflation, I would also like to highlight one other important fact that the way currency behaves will be important to look at, because that will have the final implications for the inflation story. So in 2018-19, what happened is that US weighted average tariff went up by 2.7%, but the trade-weighted dollar appreciated by 10.3%. So in the end, if you look at the actual facts, US core goods inflation went down, US import price index went down after the imposed tariffs on China. So that will be another important variable to look at as to what happens to the currency dynamics.
Oh, that's very important what you're saying, that, actually last time around, in spite of the tariffs, the import price index actually went down for the US. So we mustn't run away with expectations of no Fed hikes. no Fed cuts. But therefore, what is your currency expert telling you? We've already seen the yuan appreciate actually after the lack of any announcement from 7.3. It's come up to 7.27. How much does your team expect yuan to depreciate? And therefore, how much may the rupee depreciate?
So, look, I think right this point of time, as I mentioned, our base case is that the tariffs will go up on China. Right now, of course, there is no clear clarity on when those tariffs will go up. But in our base case, assuming the tariff path which I just mentioned to you earlier, we are assuming that yuan will depreciate to 7.6 by end of 2025. And that would sort of be very much the fate we are expecting for other currencies in the region, because China is a big economy in the region. It has a lot of trade relationship with the various countries in the region. And so we expect the whole group to see currency depreciation. INR will see less depreciation than CNY, but it will also see some depreciation in sympathy with what happens to yuan.
Okay. Well, actually, I was looking at the rupee yuan chart, and the rupee, which used to be about 10.5 rupees about 4 years ago, is now almost 11.8 rupees to buy a yuan. So actually, the rupee has depreciated versus the yuan. But separately, I wanted your views on India as well. Do you still stick by that 6.5% growth forecast that you all gave us earlier this month? Or do you think, both global headwinds and an Indian slowdown consumption story can make 2025 less, growth, can lead to less growth than you earlier estimated?
So, well, Latha, as I mentioned, if the base case is that there are no aggressive universal tariffs across the region, then in that scenario, you will probably not see a big impact on global corporate confidence, global growth, global trade, which means that there is definitely some downside to India from the external environment, because there will be some tariff increase on China. But, because there is no broader trade tension, that will help India from an external environment perspective, not being so bad as 2018-19. So I think with that assumption, we think India can still achieve its 6.5% GDP growth. And, while we are talking about this trade tensions and its implications for goods exports for India, if you look at services exports, they have accelerated quite nicely. And services exports have become quite meaningful in size. Annualized, it's about $375 billion. And those exports are growing at the average rate of about 15% in the last 3 months. That used to be much lower. So in the last 3-4 months, we've seen a big acceleration in service exports. So that's one of the factors that is making us feel that the external environment may not be all that bad for India. And then we are expecting fiscal easing, effectively government capital expenditure picking up. We are expecting that the RBI will ease on monetary policy, on regulatory front, injecting liquidity and cutting rates. So these three factors, services exports, fiscal easing, and monetary easing, makes us feel that, that 6.5% GDP growth target for India is still achievable.
Okay, well, that is good to hear. So the current slowdown in urban consumption that we heard in the second quarter, and again, we had Zomato numbers and they were also indicating some slowdown. It could be other reasons specific to the company, but at the moment, you're not worried about consumption dragging down GDP below your estimate.
We would say that is a risk, Latha, but at the same time, I would say that the bigger reason for growth slowdown was the government capital expenditure.
Okay.
And at the same time, the lagged effect of regulatory tightening on the monetary front. So if we were to identify, these were the two big reasons for downside to GDP growth. And now we see those actually coming to help the growth outlook.
Okay, fair point. Actually, the Reserve Bank has also announced daily repos, something they were, so against. So clearly, they are on the front foot to mend liquidity or make it a little easier.
And you've seen the announcements on the regulatory front as well. More and more NBFCs have got the ability to go and lend back again.
Yes. The strictness of prior months of 2024 has abated. Chetan, what would you therefore expect from the budget? Is it likely to give a leg up in any form or fashion?
Well, I think if the budget continues to take that approach that the government took in the first budget announcement after the elections were done, I think that message of trying to boost investment and jobs would be my most important thing to watch in the budget. It looks like the government is doubling down on that plan. We are hearing more and more from the government in that direction. So my biggest ask, and I don't know, Latha, if you saw the report that we just put out on what is needed to solve India's jobs problem. The most important ask in that report that we have laid down is it's not something that the government is not aware and it's not taking up actions. But we want more on that front, which is to invest in infrastructure, to push policies that drives manufacturing exports. These two will be very important in terms of actions to be taken. And one specific ask, if I were maybe to be able to put it out to the government through your channel, is to work out a plan on how to incentivize states to improve their business environment. Because I think what happens now is if you think of a businessman, whether a domestic entrepreneur or an international entrepreneur, whenever they go and try and set up a factory and a business, they go through a number of challenges in terms of the bureaucratic hesitation or bureaucratic issues. And I think that needs to be addressed. And the central government, if it can work out an innovative plan to incentivize the state governments to change their policies and deregulate. Look what we are seeing in the US. It's something similar. They are focused on deregulation. And I think India also needs to focus a lot more on deregulation and make that business environment far more friendlier for the corporate sector, whether it is international or domestic.
Okay, thank you very much, Chetan. Certainly, this will be broadcast and brought to the notice of policymakers. Thank you very much for summarizing very nicely what we should expect from the US, could expect from the US, as well from the Indian budget and the Reserve Bank. Well, have a great 2025. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's the word from Morgan Stanley. They are expecting a slow increase in tariffs and that to be nullified by currency depreciation. It looks like a positive set actually for India. 6.5, we could take it with both hands, that kind of GDP growth. That's it on this edition of It's the Economy. Thanks for watching. Chuckbusters coming up.